Welcome back. We continue our adventure in English grammar by taking a look at a few sentences from Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. Our first one is pretty short, so let's get to it. People don't rise from nothing. And at first glance, this doesn't seem too complicated, and really it's not, but there is one unique twist here. So when we start identifying what's going on in the sentences, we're typically looking first for a subject and verb. And if you're taking a look, you can probably see that our subject is going to be people. But now that we have to identify the verb phrase, that gets a little bit tricky. And that's because of this word here, don't, which is a contraction. The verb contract means to make smaller. So a contraction is the making smaller of two or more words, where we're replacing one or more letters with an apostrophe. So don't is actually a form of do not. And what's tricky about this is the parts of speech of these two words. So do is a verb or a helping verb, and not is an adverb. So we're fusing these two parts of speech, which makes identifying what's going on in the sentence a little bit tricky. So we know that our subject is people, and if we're going to identify the verb, or in this case the verb phrase, we actually have to pull apart the words that are in the contraction. So subject people, verb phrase consists of the verbs do and rise, but it does not include the word not. Not is an adverb, and so we're not going to include it as part of the verb phrase. It is modifying or describing what's happening here, the verbs, so that's why it's an adverb and not an adjective. At the end of the sentence, we have a prepositional phrase. There's nothing new there. Our preposition is from, and the object of that preposition is nothing. So this is like a lot of sentences we've already looked at. The one twist is the contraction there, and sometimes in a contraction you'll have two different parts of speech. So if you have to identify something in the sentence, it often helps to break that contraction down into its two original words. Our next sentence is a little bit longer and seems maybe a little bit more intimidating, but it's not too bad either. The people who stand before kings may look like they did it all by themselves. So we've got some clauses here, and what are they? In fact, we have three clauses. We have one independent clause, and we have two dependent clauses. The independent clause is the people may look, and the dependent clauses are who stand before kings and like they did it all by themselves. And let's take a look at each of these clauses individually. First, our independent clause. The people may look. Subject, once again, is people, and we have a verb phrase again instead of a single verb, okay? And the verb phrase here is may look. The is a definite article. We've seen those a lot. Not going to talk about articles a whole bunch. So people subject, may look is our verb phrase. And in this case, look is a linking verb. And I'm pointing that out now because we're going to return to that in a little bit. Now, our first dependent clause, who stand before kings. Who is our subject, and it is also the dependent marker word or the relative pronoun, however you want to think about it. But who is one of these words that when you see it, a little red flag should pop up in your head, indicating to you that we probably have a dependent clause. Okay? So who is our subject and our marker word or relative pronoun? The verb here is stand, and once again we have a prepositional phrase. It's pretty tough to find an English language sentence without a prepositional phrase. So who stand before kings? Not too terribly difficult there. Like they did it all by themselves. So this is a little bit different. In our previous clause, who is a relative pronoun. In this case, like is what we call a subordinate conjunction. Okay. Again, the names of these things is not terribly important. I'm not going to quiz you on those. I don't really care if you know what they're called. I just want you to know how to use them. So here the marker word, or whatever you want to refer to it as, is like. That's kind of our flag word. Our subject here is they. The verb is did. What did they do? The answer is the direct object it. Following it is the word all. It's an adjective giving us more information or modifying it. And then, of course, we have another prepositional phrase, by themselves. Okay? Like they did it all by themselves. This is the first time we've looked at a sentence that has like. Like can be used in a few different ways, but here it's being used as a subordinate conjunction. It's beginning a dependent clause, which is also known as a subordinate clause. Okay, Now let's return to our independent clause, because we know that to have an independent clause, we have to have a subject, and we have that. We have a verb, we have that. If we wanted to add a piece of punctuation, we would have a capital letter and piece of punctuation. That's something we need. But we also have to figure out whether it expresses a complete thought. And that's where things get a little bit tricky, because if you just look at the sentence or the clause, the people may look, it seems a little bit unsatisfying, right? So maybe our thought isn't quite complete. Well, what do we need to complete that thought? Okay, so we would use this clause as what we call a subject complement to complete the thought of our independent clause. So the people may look, and then what would complete that sentence? Well, like they did it all by themselves. We can remove the other dependent clause, who stand before kings, and now we have the people may look like they did it all by themselves. So sometimes a clause or a phrase or an infinitive can serve a different purpose, okay? So they might be subjects, they might be objects, they might be serving as adjectives, all of these different purposes. So in this case, like they did it all by themselves, completes the thought, and because we have a linking verb here, we call this a subject complement. And again, the word or the phrase subject complement really isn't important, but you can think of it in a way as a direct object for linking verbs. The main difference is that subject complements don't have to be just nouns or pronouns. They can also be adjectives, and we're going to get to that in a second. So let's take a look. If I have action verbs, let's say I'm looking at the verb steal, past tense stole. The defender stole the ball. Stole is an action verb, and the direct object of that verb is ball. Okay, and ball is a noun. So anytime we have an action verb and we're looking for a direct object, that direct object has to be a noun or a pronoun. The defender is a subject. He or she stole. What did they steal? The ball. Now here's a different situation. I am cold. Am is a linking verb, and the main difference between an action verb and a linking verb is, an action verb, not surprisingly, describes an action, but linking verbs can also describe states of being, okay? And for that reason, the subject complement, or the quote, air quote, direct object of a linking verb can also be an adjective, and that's what we have here. I am cold. Cold is an adjective. I could say I am a teacher, and teacher is a noun. That's fine. But I can also say I am cold, and cold is an adjective. So the main difference between the action verb and the linking verb when you're looking for what completes the thought is whether it has to be just a noun or a pronoun, as is the case in the objects, direct object, indirect object, or if it can also include an adjective, which is the case with the subject complement. So again, the terminology is not all that important, but I just want you to know that when you're dealing with a linking verb and you're trying to figure out what completes that thought, you can also use an adjective in addition to a noun or a pronoun. So here's an example with looked, because looked is one of these tricky words in English. It can be used as an action verb, and the example here is I looked at the expensive new car, and that's an actual action that I'm undertaking. So if I'm on the car lot and I say, oh, there's this Jaguar, I'm going to go take a look at it, something that I would never ever be able to afford. Looked is an action verb. It doesn't really take an object here. Not all action verbs have to take objects, whether they're direct or indirect. But this is an action verb. But looked can also be used as a linking verb. And again, a linking verb sort of indicates a state of being. So the sentence here is, the sprinter looked tired. Looked is a linking verb, and it's sort of, tired is describing the state of being of the sprinter. And tired is an adjective. It's not a noun or a pronoun. So the word that completes this idea, or that completes the thought, which is what we need for an independent clause, subject, verb, complete thought, capitalization, punctuation. This word is an adjective. It's not a noun or pronoun. So the subject complement here is tired. So that's the difference between using look as an action verb and a linking verb. And there are a few other words that cross over like that. All right, so having looked at these two sentences, what are some things that we can take away? From our first sentence, we can figure out that adverbs are not always part of our verb phrases. In fact, they're never part of our verb phrases, excuse me. So if we have a contraction that's part of our verb phrase, we want to separate it out into its original parts and not include the adverb or whatever else the word might be in the verb phrase, okay? You might find a sentence with more dependent clauses than independent clauses. That's the case in our second sentence. We had one independent clause and two dependent clauses. Another takeaway is learning that linking verbs, which express states of being, take subject complements, which can be nouns and pronouns, but they can also be adjectives. And sometimes an entire clause might play the role of a subject, of an object, or in the case that we had earlier, of a subject complement. Okay, so just a few things to take away from this video.